Welcome to Transport Vlog and the voice of Paul, and in this video I'm going to cover the Sydney Metro West construction activity that is taking place in the Clyde area. And there's heaps going on here, including tunnel boring machines that were launched from this shaft close to Unwin Street, a dive site that's been completed close to James Roos Drive, the diversion of roads and creeks in several places, and enabling works for the future stabling sidings on the site of the former Sydney Speedway. The Clyde Stabling and Maintenance facility is between Sydney Olympic Park and Parramatta and is a key component of the new Sydney Metro West line that is due to open in 2032, and it's the only section that will be above ground. I'm going to start at the Clyde Shaft close to the location of the future Rosehill Services facility, where a community open day took place on the 20th of October 2024. The shaft is under this segment shed, which has two green gantry cranes, and these lifted the tunnel boring machines, TBMs for short, into the shaft and will now be used to feed the TBMs with tunnel lining segments. And this shed in the distance is where the excavated spoil will go before being transported off-site. And installing sheds like these means that work can take place regardless of the weather. It's now up these stairs to see what is inside this large shaft. So now looking into the shaft, and this is facing west, and in here are two TBMs. The TBM on the left is Betty, and the one on the right is Dorothy. TBM Betty is named after Olympic athlete Betty Cuthbert, whilst TBM Dorothy's name comes from human rights activist Dorothy Buckland Fuller. These are hard rock double shield TBMs and are designed to excavate through sandstone and shale. TBM Betty was launched in late September 2024 and had already bored 100 metres of the westbound tunnel towards Parramatta. What you can see here is the backup section, more on this in a moment. TBM Dorothy is all ready to start boring the eastbound tunnel, and you can see the shield and cutting edge within this shaft. It is common practice to launch TBMs about a month apart, as it's a complex operation that requires specialised equipment and skilled engineers. So staggering their launch dates makes better use of both equipment and people, as resources can be focused on one TBM at a time, rather than being stretched across two simultaneous launches. These TBMs are about 170 metres long, and the Clyde shaft is only 130 metres in length, so TBM Betty had to start tunnelling before the rear components could be added to this TBM's backup system, and that will be the case for Dorothy too. And their 170 metre length makes them longer than the combined length of two A380 aircraft. So let's have a closer look at TBM Betty on the left. This white structure just peeking out of the tunnel could be the control cabin or refuge chamber. Not much to see on this part of TBM Betty, but to the left of it is a grey conveyor. This will soon be connected to the TBM and will be used to transport spoil out of the tunnel and then out of this shaft. It will be connected to another conveyor that will take the excavated material to the spoil shed. Now for a closer look at TBM Dorothy on the right, starting with the all-important shield and cutter head right at the front. And the wall that it's looking aggressively at won't be there for much longer. And this is the control cabin, and in there are screens with lots of technical information that makes no sense to me, but I'm sure it does to the engineers and operators on board. And in case you were wondering, this wasn't the real control centre, but a simulator that is used for training. The buttons make more sense to me than the screens, with green buttons to start functions and red buttons to stop them, with orange buttons to make things extend or retract or to perform other functions. There are also some black knobs to make those fine adjustments, and everything is clearly labelled. Further along TBM Dorothy are two pipes, including this large one on the right, and lots of cables. If you know what these pipes and cables are used for, along with this dark green unit, then do share this in the comments below. Now TBMs Betty and Dorothy have been on quite a journey already. In mid-2023 they started boring from this very location, but in the opposite direction towards Sydney Olympic Park. They broke through into the Sydney Olympic Park station box about 10 months later and were then disassembled, lifted out using a 600-ton crane and brought back to Clyde in pieces by road, a process that involved 56 truck movements. The components were then lowered back into this shaft and then reassembled in preparation for tunnelling towards Parramatta and Westmead. The Clyde site is much larger than Sydney Olympic Park and more suited to launching TBMs and the storing and removal of spoil. At Sydney Olympic Park, trucks removing spoil would create additional traffic congestion, especially when major events are being held, and also impact local residents. And that's why this Clyde site was used to bore the tunnels in both directions. And this is not the first time this has happened. On the Sydney Metro City extension, TBM Kathleen bored the first tunnel from Barangaroo to Blues Point and was then disassembled and transported back to Barangaroo by barge and then reassembled to bore the second tunnel. By the end of July 2025, both TBMs had reached Parramatta Station, and I was able to get up close and personal to TBM Dorothy at a community open day that took place on the 9th of August 2025. It's now ready to complete the final leg of its journey to Westmead. TBM Betty has already been relaunched and has bored about 200 metres of the tunnel to Westmead, and you can see the back of it in the distance. Look out for a video appearing shortly that will cover this open day in greater detail, and when it's available I'll link to it in the top right and in the description below. The Clyde Shaft is 130 metres long and 28 metres deep and will in future contain a double crossover. And as you'll discover later in this video, this area is prone to flooding, so this shaft will be fully lined and tanked to keep all the water out. The water table in this area is just 2 metres below ground. So now walking along Unwin Street towards the heritage listed former Department of Main Roads building. And the wall of this building will be retained, including the iconic Department of Main Roads sign and the year 1944 above it. Now looking at what is behind this building's wall, and I believe the concrete columns and horizontal beams will also be retained. However, the steel trusses that supported the former sawtooth roof are in pretty bad condition, so will be going. Just beyond this heritage building, Unwin Street became K Street, and this entire road has now been replaced by a realigned and largely elevated continuation of Unwin Street. This is how K Street looked before Sydney Metro works started. The maintenance facility access tracks will go directly across this road, which is why it had to go. The old Carlingford Line track bed is to the left of these trees. And to see how the entire site looked before construction work started, including Sydney Speedway, an old diesel station, a major downer site, and the old Rose Hill station, then check out this video now appearing in the top right. K Street was still open to the public in October 2024, and the new Unwin Street bridge that will go over the maintenance facility access tracks was progressing well. And although this bridge is nothing special in terms of construction techniques, it does mark the first major and permanent change within the whole Clyde site since the demolition of all the buildings in 2022. When it returned in April 2025, the new realigned Unwin Street had opened. It has a wide shared path for pedestrians and cyclists on the west side, and I was very curious to see what the views would be like from the new bridge. So on the east side of the busy James Roos Drive is the tunnel portal where the maintenance facility access tracks will go underground, and it looks like this has all been completed, and this is a very significant development. And now for a view of the tunnel entrances themselves, and notice how the one on the right is slightly higher. That's probably to go over the two running tunnels. Behind the tunnel portal is a large acoustic shed and the bridge over Grand Avenue. So this is the tunnel portal on the map, and one track will join the westbound running line, with the other going above the two running tunnels to join the eastbound line. And then at the Clyde Shaft where the TBMs were launched will be the double crossover that I mentioned earlier. Underneath the new Unwin Street bridge will be 3 tracks, with the third one being a shunt track, and this will end just before the tunnel portal. And also below this bridge will be a junction from the shunt track to one of the lines that will go into the tunnel. The old K Street is still here and has become an access road to this Sydney Metro construction site, and you can see how the future tracks would have crossed this road as they curve slightly eastwards to go under the new Unwin Street bridge that I'm now standing on. And going back to this clip taken before this bridge opened reveals that there is plenty of space for the 3 tracks to go underneath. Also visible are the beginnings of 2 structures that will elevate the track bed. This will be for flood protection. There are also a number of precast concrete segments which are also likely to be used to raise the track bed. On the other side you can see the green spoil shed, and where these trees are is Duck Creek. And immediately in front of this creek a 70,000 cubic metre flood basin is being built. Floodwaters will be redirected into this basin and then slowly fed back into Duck Creek in the days following a major flood event. And where the trees end, Duck Creek has been realigned to go underground. More on this shortly. This area where the future sidings will be is currently being elevated, again to minimise the effects of flooding. And now coming into view is a water conveyance structure, which I'll be walking on soon, so keep watching. This construction site is by far the largest on the Sydney Metro West project, so there is plenty of space to store spoil as you can see here. Up to 250,000 cubic metres of spoil has been stored here, with some of it being used within the site for ground raising and levelling and also for embankments. The new Unwin Street now descends gradually and goes over a Beckett's Creek, which now looks like this. It used to look like this, with a very pungent smell and was a breeding ground for mosquitoes. Now for a view of the whole of this road looking west, with the bridge in the distance. And on the left is another section of Duck Creek, which has been realigned slightly to go under the new Unwin Street. Duck Creek will then go below the future sidings before joining up with Beckett's Creek, and I'll talk more about this a little later. On the 12th of April 2025 there was another open day, and this time it was in the area where the future stabling sidings will be. And within the site office was something I was not expecting to see, and that was part of the entrance to the Sydney Speedway. This is the only part of Sydney Speedway that still remains. To see how Sydney Speedway looked before it was demolished, check out this video now appearing in the top right. So now heading out on site, and it's always lovely to get the red carpet treatment. The green spoil shed is in the distance, and this land here will soon be raised to reduce the impact of flooding. These high-vis orange sheets create what is called a marker layer, and it warns that the soil below this layer may be contaminated. This will all shortly be covered over, so these orange sheets will be buried. However, if anyone digs into this soil in the future, and I mean like 100 years from now, they will hit this orange marker layer, and that will warn them that what is below is best left alone. The concrete structure now coming into view on the left will have the tracks for the sidings on top of it, and under that, as mentioned earlier, is Duck Creek. With two creeks running through this area, it is prone to flooding, and that's the reason for raising the track bed and supporting it on these concrete structures. Here is Duck Creek on the left, now with much higher banks on either side, and you can see how it now goes under the future track bed. It used to look like this and was a haven for rubbish and wasn't appealing for ducks or humans. Now walking on this new raised concrete structure that will in future have a number of sidings on it. Sydney Metro referred to this as a water conveyance structure, as its main purpose, other than being the base for a section of the future sidings, is to allow Duck Creek to flow below the tracks, with the deeper banks minimising the potential for flooding. This is rebar mesh. It helps distribute the load evenly across the concrete surface and prevents cracks from occurring. The concrete will soon be poured over this. From here, you get a different view of the new Unwin Street bridge. As mentioned earlier, some of the spoil from the tunnelling has been used within this site, including on either side of this bridge, and that's very noticeable on the northern side. We then had a chance to view some of the construction vehicles, starting with this 10-ton roller. When additional soil is required for ground levelling, ground raising or embankments, this roller will compact it. It's used each time the ground is raised by 30 centimetres so that the soil is compacted before another layer is added. In some cases, the ground has been raised by 6 metres, so that's a lot of layers of soil to compact. Next up is this 30-ton Moxie. This is used to transport spoil and other materials from the spoil shed to other areas of the site for either storage or reuse. This one doesn't tip. Instead, the material is ejected from the back of the vehicle, and this is a much safer way to transport and distribute spoil around the site.
Well, you need some flexibility to get onto here.
It was fun to check these vehicles out, but unfortunately for me and everyone else, they had hidden the keys.
Good view from up here. It's even got a radio.
This is a 14-ton excavator. The excavators used within the Clyde site range from 1 tonne to 40 tonnes, with the lighter and more compact ones being used to dig smaller trenches and excavate close to other structures. And last but not least is this vehicle, which is called a rubber duck. It's an excavator that is on wheels rather than tracks, and it's used on concrete slabs and firm ground, often for carrying equipment and transporting materials. Now that last open day was back in April 2025, and lots has changed since then, so these last few clips will show you how everything looked in early August 2025. And by this time, the protective fencing on the bridge was in place, but that didn't stop me getting some amazing views, including a section of the new track bed that will carry the 2 access lines and the shunt track. This wet and miserable day clearly illustrates the need to raise the track bed here, with plenty of water congregating underneath this new elevated concrete structure. Notice how the ground between the bridge and this new track bed has also been raised, and it will be interesting to see if this ground becomes a concrete track bed too. And of course that means that K Street is no more, along with what was left of the old Carlingford line in this area. Where these trees were is about where the concrete track bed now is. In the distance close to James Roos Drive are some tunnel lining segments, and here is another look into the Clyde Dive and the twin tunnels, and the demountables on the left are where the old Rosehill station used to be. See if you can recognise some of the construction vehicles that I covered earlier. Major changes have also occurred within the site of the future stabling and maintenance facility. This includes further realigning and higher embankments for Beckett's Creek, to where it joins Duck Creek just here. But more exciting is this brand new elevated track bed that goes over both A. Beckett's Creek and Duck Creek, and this will lead to the future maintenance facility. So that's for these two lines on the map, and the junctions into the maintenance facility will start after these tracks cross Duck Creek. So that will be around here. Again, you can see how all this track bed is elevated and the permanent fencing is already in place all the way to where the maintenance facility will be. This is the start of the water conveyance structure where Duck Creek goes underneath, and the second underpass is probably for drainage and to direct floodwater into the new basin. And the third underpass is for A. Beckett's Creek. It was fantastic to see this new elevated track bed in place, and clearly shows how quickly work is progressing within this area. It was certainly worth getting wet for. The area to the right of this new track bed will be for the stabling sidings, and it appears that the ground has now been raised to be at the same level as this new track bed. With all the surface water from 4 days of heavy rain, you can see why drainage and flood protection is so important, and I suspect the drainage systems will be added once the floodwater basin has been built, so it won't look like this when the tracks are in place. Now installed is some of the familiar Sydney Metro perimeter fencing that will go around the edge of the stabling sidings area. And now finishing off with a final look at the completed water conveyance structure from this side, with Duck Creek going through the first underpass and the second probably being used to redirect floodwater towards the new basin.
So that wraps up this update on the Clyde Maintenance and Stabling facility. Please give this video a like, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment below, subscribe if you haven't done so already, and I'll see you in the next one soon. Bye for now.